Welcome to today's episode of In the Know. The Venezuelan crisis is a political socio-economic epidemic that started under the reign of Hugo Chavez from his presidency in 1999 until 2013, when Nicolas Maduro took over. It is currently the worst that it has ever been. The GDP has plummeted, and it is currently worse than the Great Depression. 95% of the Venezuelan economy comes from its oil industry, and the economy of Venezuela suffers greatly due to this. These economic and political structures have led to violent outbreaks from the Venezuelan citizens. The current Venezuelan president is Nicolas Maduro, who won an election this May. However, there is widespread controversy over this win, as many nations refuse to accept it due to the fact that only 45% of the population actually voted. There have been multiple protesters against the Maduro regime when he took over from the deceased Hugo Chavez, who was widely popular among the Venezuelans. Since his rise to leadership, there have been numerous economic problems, most prominently beginning in 2014 with the sharp rise of oil prices. This has caused protests to increase, and the Maduro regime has been violently responding to these by using propaganda against opponents in recent elections. Venezuela is a petrostate with 95% of its industry coming from oil exports. Problems began in 2014 as oil prices began to rise as the stock market began to collapse. The government had to cut multiple programs due to this funding gap. There has been a 30-year low of 1.5 million barrels per day, the production decreasing by 20,000 barrels each day. The dramatic inflation of bolivar, or Venezuelan currency, has also been prevalent in the country. Each bolivar is worth 1/1000th of a U.S. penny, and the International Monetary Fund estimates a 13,000% inflation this year. 90% of the country is currently below the poverty line, and massive debt to the international bondholders leads the way for oil assets to be seized. Oil economy is slowly beginning to rise, so it may be able to get a bit of respite. Venezuela also has a border dispute that has been prevalent as a long-term issue. British Guyana is divided into 6 administrative regions, as you can see to my left. In 1840, Venezuela claimed all of Guyana west of the Essequibo River. Britain and Venezuela argued over a boundary line between British Guyana and Venezuela. In 1899, Venezuela and the Barima district of Britain agreed to a new borderline, as you can see to my left once again. In 1966, the countries began to hear ideas from the UN Secretary General on ways to settle the dispute peacefully. Since 1970, Venezuelan maps show all of the area west from the eastern bank of the Essequibo, including the islands in the river. Venezuela wanted the territory due to all raw materials and oil that were prevalent in the country. It was also seen as an opportunity to increase ocean foods and exports. And now we go to Emily Fitzpatrick, who is going to go ahead and tell us about possible solutions to the problems in Venezuela.
So one of the main things we need to do is first redo the elections, obviously, because a large amount of the international community doesn't even believe they're valid. We need to redo them so that at least 75% of the country votes. And then we also need to decrease corruption in Venezuela. The U.S. has placed sanctions on specific government officials who have been convicted of being involved in drug trafficking and other corruption-related scandals, and we need to ensure that we have found all the government officials involved in that type of business, and we also need to make sure that we find sanctions placed individually on them following the U.S.'s suit. The main reason Venezuela's economy collapsed in the first place is because they're so dependent on the oil industry. So what we need to do is diversify the economy with ocean farming and fisheries. The majority of the population is on the northern coast of Venezuela and South America, as you can see here. And if most of the population is on the border, that means that a lot of people will be able to help run these fisheries, run ocean farming, and there will be a large amount of supply for laborers. This system there's a lot of space available. It's very beneficial to the environment, decreases ocean acidification, and there's a lot of room to cultivate because of this 3D ocean farming system, as you can see here. There's also a nonprofit called Greenwave, which works to educate farmers and help them become financially stable during the first 2 years that they are ocean farmers. And this is much more beneficial for all organisms involved and involves space conservation, so is more efficient. As we've seen in 1966, both Venezuela and British-based authorities in Guyana are influenced by the UN Secretary General and just the UN in general. So one potential solution would be to hold biannual summits at the headquarters of the UN. This is located in New York City, so the area doesn't give any political advantage to either Venezuela or Guyana authorities. And they could talk about different scenarios involving the conflict, any new developments, and this would just allow better communication and preventing any future conflict from arising.
And now we go to our on-site correspondent, Margot Hart, who will go ahead and tell us about the humanitarian issues happening in Venezuela.
Currently, I'm on location in one of Venezuela's most undersupplied emergency rooms. Currently, throughout the country, emergency rooms are crowded and lack necessary supplies, including basic medicine, vaccinations, catheters, bandages, and nutritional supplies. Malnutrition is an epidemic throughout Venezuela, and emergency rooms are filled with children suffering of malnutrition due to the poverty crisis. Though non-governmental organizations have been trying to help, there's only so much they can do, and government funding is out of the picture due to Venezuela's massive debt. Since 2016, the rate of infant mortality has increased by 30%. This is due to a lack of safe medical supplies in facilities rather than hospitals. Parents are expected to provide their own medical equipment, and they are expected to acquire them through the black market rather than do what is expected in general society and get them received from the hospitals. The Venezuelan food crisis has catastrophically affected the population. With most of the country living on less than $2 a month, it is not uncommon for people to be seen getting scraps from the trash, as seen right here. The country has been dependent on food imports from other countries, but due to these countries' indebtedness, the government has been unable to pay for imports and the people are still starving. According to a recent survey, the average Venezuelan lost 24 pounds in the past year. Hundreds of children are dying due to malnutrition and diseases that could have been easily prevented by adequate nutrition. Here I am on location at the main crossing where many refugees risk their lives. According to the International Organization for Immigration, 12 million fled in the last year due to the failing economy, famine, health needs, persecution, or other reasons. In Colombia, 50,000 cross the border daily, with 3,000 just staying. For other reasons, they may stay to receive medical supplies or assistance. There is social pressure to expel refugees, and temporary visas have been suspended in Colombia. 40% of migrant refugees crossing the main route are children or under the age of 18. In Panama, 270,000, with 230 in Ecuador, 165,000 in Peru, along with 149,000 arriving in Chile. Multiple non-governmental organizations have been assisting with migration to these countries, including the Colombian Red Cross. I have arrived to my office in the United States, and now I'm going to describe some potential solutions that could be used to combat the crisis in Venezuela. The next crisis we encountered was the food crisis. One way to combat this would be through packages from the World Health Organization and Action Against Hunger. Both food and water, as well as seeds and baby formula. These packages would provide both a temporary and a longer-term solution. The non-perishable food and water would feed an individual and provide the necessary nutrients, and these seeds would allow families to grow enough fresh food for themselves to eat. But we must also acknowledge infant starvation and the rising infant mortality rates. These packages would have to include baby formula, because currently people are using unsafe alternatives to baby formula, including cow's milk, tea, and concoctions of barley. These are leading to more deaths. In an interview with the New York Times, a woman who had lost her nephew to malnutrition stated, "We could not find formula anywhere," said Miss Peraza, the great aunt, acknowledging that she knew the food could hurt the baby. "Yes, it was bad, but I tell you, if we had not done it, the baby could have died." The third crisis we encountered was the health crisis. As we saw, a lot of hospitals had a lack of medical supplies, which made it extremely difficult for anything to happen. We would gain health funding from the World Health Organization, or WHO, and the Red Cross would provide bases throughout the country, like with vaccines, supplies, and IV fluids. And the BCA, or the Border Control Access, would apply facilities for vaccines around borders, airport docks, and other things, as well as figuring out who can and can go out without border and vaccinations and necessary supplies. The final crisis we came to terms with was the refugee crisis. The UNHCR aid mission would quell social unrest and, with a small contingent of peacekeepers to provide protection. The DWB, RC, and World Health Organization would provide medication and other necessary supplies. And the World Food Project would provide enough nutritional supplies to the refugees. With a student exchange program, which would assist with camps and education, we would be able to educate the society that would eventually rebuild Venezuela. Through water aid to assist with providing water and a thirst project for long-term refugee communities, reintegration with communities, and more jobs would become available through the ocean farming mentioned earlier.
Thank you so much, Margot. We were happy to have you on this episode. And that concludes our episode of In the Know. If you would like to donate to help the families in Venezuela, you can access them through the websites on the screen or call the numbers below and make a donation. If you would like to help keep our program going, please donate at www.intheknow.help. Thank you, Margot, for your wonderful reporting as an on-site. Okay.
Break a window. But if we got locked,
I didn't know that supplies was spelled with 1 p.m.
You
I
know
just called you
what?
Emily.
I'm typing as fast as I can.
Okay, Margot Refugee 1. 2, actually.
The last crisis we had to come.
The final crisis.
The final crisis we.
Oh, that
His library.
baby, baby, baby. Oh.
It's not a Justin Bieber concert, Kristen. It's the program.
It went black and I got scared. Okay.
I'm ready.
Health crisis, Margot, tape.
Tape.
Hey,
Number
It's not 13
4.
reasons
I know.
why.
Take 4. The fact that only 45% of the economy.
you could have pushed through.
I know.
I know that microphone doesn't work.
Hello. I hear an echo. Hello.
Epidemic throughout Venezuela, and emergency rooms are filled with children suffering of malnutrition. All supplies and basic necessities are either rationed.
Ration.
That cut multiple programs in order to increase the increase the funding.
Yeah. Okay. So.
Yeah.
Doesn't like it.
Why is it so hot?
Because I'm in here.
There's also been
Let's go.
LOL. Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Margot, live reporter, water crisis?
Yes.
Take 1.
Thank you.
And now we go to our on-site.
On-site.
We
are
are
ready.
Have. I completely blanked. Sorry. Excel.
You're still pretty short, Margot. Sorry.
Okay.
Wow. Now we go to our on-site. Why did I pause? Just
Both Venezuela and British-based authorities in Guyana
I love my mom. I love my dad. Also have. Oh, I can't. This is so hard. Okay, has been causing a difficult crisis. Donate to any further crises happening in Venezuela, please.
You want to donate to the crisis?
Okay.
Oh.
That's a wrap.
That's a wrap. Woo!